When it comes to nutrition, cancer patients and their doctors face a deluge of questions, controversies, and conflicting information. Can diet and nutrition really help fight cancer? Which supplements are appropriate to take during radiation or chemotherapy? Which are contraindicated? Dr. Jean Wallace provides authoritative answers to these questions, distilling the wide volume of available research into evidence-based dietary, nutritional, and botanical strategies that complement each patient's medical care. Dr. Wallace earned her master's and doctoral degrees in nutrition from American State University and also completed an additional 2 years specialized nutritional training, at the Institute for Educational Therapy, also in Santa Cruz. She is a member of the National Association of Nutrition Professionals and the Society of Integrative Oncology, and has 15 years' experience as a clinical nutrition consultant. In 1997, when a dear friend was diagnosed with a glioblastoma multiforme, she began specializing in nutrition for people with brain tumors. Today, 8 years later, this friend remains alive and well, and Dr. Wallace has worked with hundreds of brain tumor patients throughout the world. I actually just spoke to that 8-year patient about 10 minutes ago. She was sorry that she couldn't come. She has submitted a best case series of her work with 325 GBM patients to the NCI, which was favorably reviewed. Caring and compassionate, Dr. Wallace empowers her clients to harness the healing power of foods and nutrients. Today, she will talk about a novel approach to help control brain tumors by targeting a variety of biological pathways that foster tumor progression. And she will be speaking. Hopefully, you'll be able to hear her, but at the end, she'll take questions. If she can't hear you, I will repeat for you. Dr. Wallace, please.
Welcome. Good afternoon. I'm glad to be able to be here. I want to say, before I get started, the slides that you're about to see will be available on my website in the next week or two. I'm going to speak for about 35 minutes and save the last 15 minutes for questions. So, in starting, can nutrition really help fight cancer, help fight a brain tumor? We're using our most aggressive weapons of radiation and chemotherapy in the fight against brain tumors. So the question springs to mind, and I have had more than one neuro-oncologist ask me directly, how in the world can wimpy little fruits and vegetables have any beneficial effect? Today I hope to answer this question and show you several ways that nutrition can help. I also hope to give you at least 3 take-home simple strategies so that you can harness the healing power of foods. Next slide. When I work with a client, I have 3 areas of focus. These are 3 different ways that nutrition can help cancer patients. The first is foundation support. We work to promote a general well-being and support the body's innate healing process. Is your digestion working good? How's your energy level? Do you need help sleeping? The second area is to put a focus on complementing the treatments that you're undergoing. This way we can help to reduce the side effects and also possibly increase the efficacy of radiation and chemotherapy treatments. And the third area is perhaps the area I'm most well known for, and this is to work with what are called biologic response modifiers. I'd like to use an analogy here. If you imagine you're up in a helicopter and you're looking down at the enemy camp, the brain tumor, you might see that there are 5 or 6 or 7 different roads that lead into and out of the camp. While it's your doctor's job to directly bomb that camp with radiation or with chemotherapy, each of those roads represents a molecular pathway that the tumor might use to keep itself viable. In nutrition, we try to set up roadblocks at each of those roads to help control the cancer. Next slide. We're going to focus on that last pathway in my discussion today, and these different pathways that we can use to target to control the cancer. There are several of these different pathways. We can focus on the genes and the expression of the genes and keeping them stable so that the tumor doesn't become more aggressive over time. We can focus on different cell growth messengers like cytokines that send grow messages to the tumor. We can focus on the process of angiogenesis, which is the development of new blood vessels that fosters the tumor's progression and growth. We can keep the person's immune system strong. We can focus on the process of individual cell programmed cell death called apoptosis. We can promote that. And lastly, if possible, we'd like to differentiate the cells or get them to mature back into a healthy cell type. So you can see there's really a symphony of different areas that are available to be targeted. Because of time constraints today, I'm only going to address the first of these three. But typically in working with a client, I do try to address all 6 of these. Next slide. Here in slide 4, you see that little picture of a symphony up in the corner. And this is a good analogy for all the different growth factors and promoters of a brain tumor and of really many cancers. I've narrowed this down, but you can see it's still a very complex group of genes and proteins and enzymes and hormones and cytokines, all the different chemical factors within your body that promote cancer or a brain tumor to grow. I want to use a specific analogy here, and I've picked a music analogy. When you're healthy, it's like your genes have all the right sheet music, and all the musicians, all the genes are playing along together, and you get a beautiful orchestra, maybe Bach or Beethoven or just some really soothing, healing music. When you develop a cancer, what's happened is that some of the genes have changed. It's like while most of the body has healthy sheet music, some of the genes, the oncogenes that drive cancer, have the wrong sheet music. And they're playing along heavy metal or rap music while everybody else is playing Beethoven. The reason I use this analogy today is because, as you can see, we have a development in the field of oncology where pharmaceutical companies are now trying to target the genes. And this is a huge improvement for us. Instead of just using radiation and chemotherapy, which are non-specific, they can't target only the cancer cells and sometimes hurt or harm the healthy cells as well. The idea of targeting one of the genes that is expressed in cancer but is not expressed in healthy is a nice way to try to slow this down. But there's a limitation to this analogy. You see my little red circle with the line through it targeting that EGFR. There's some drugs that are experimental, such as Gleevec or Iressa or Tarceva, that try to block this. But what you can see, you have a big symphony of different promoting factors. The idea of going in and taking out one of the musicians, the cello player on the left, back there in the last row, let's just knock her out. The idea that that's going to topple the whole orchestra and stop the cancer music from playing is perhaps a little short-sighted. So when I work with a client, what I'm trying to do is say, can we change all of the genes, and can we influence all of them so that we can get all of the musicians to play the music of healing and avert the progression down the brain tumor pathway? Next slide. So this is the first thing I want to teach you, which is what can you do with your diet starting today and tomorrow that will help you normalize gene expression? Next slide, we should be on slide 6. I want to give you a little taste of the research in this particular area. And I also want to at first say it's really important to understand that you are not stuck with the genetic luck of the draw that you were born with. We originally thought genes were sort of fixed, and whatever gene you had, if you got the gene for a brain tumor, which most brain tumors are not genetically driven, but if this was so, that wouldn't mean that you would necessarily end up with a brain tumor, because you would still have to express that gene. And the expression of a gene is very plastic. It changes depending on what it's exposed to in the environment and your nutritional influences. So you're not stuck with the genetic luck of the draw you're born with. We're learning that there are some very important gene-nutrient interactions. What I'm presenting here in this slide is a study done by Leonard Augenlicht at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. In this really intriguing study done in animals, he took animals and he fed them either a healthy diet or a SAD diet. I wonder if anyone has a sense what a SAD diet is. It stands for Standard American Diet. This is a diet that's low in nutrition, low in fiber, low in fruits and vegetables. The animals that were fed the SAD diet developed cancer in about a year's time. In this experiment, he was able to analyze the DNA, and he looked at 27,000 different DNA points. When the animals are eating a SAD diet, in a short period of time, over 2,000 different genes change their expression, and they begin moving towards a cancer profile. What was most compelling is that in the second part of this experiment, he took the animals who were eating the SAD diet and reverted their diet back to a healthy diet, replacing many of the nutrients that are not available in the standard American diet. Within a short period of time, the pattern of gene expression reverted back to a healthy profile. So this is a very strong example of how what we eat alters genes. There's a human study that just came out a couple of months ago. Lillian Thompson up in Canada has published a study in breast cancer patients where right after women were first diagnosed with their breast cancer, they had their biopsy. They were fed a muffin that either had flax seeds or a placebo, a muffin that didn't have. And they ate these muffins just for the short time, 2, 3, or 4 weeks until they actually had their surgery. And after the surgery, they compared parameters of the tumor with the tumor that was the cells that were taken during the biopsy. And what they found is this short intervention with the flaxseed changed the expression of several of the genes that drive the breast cancer process. Most importantly, the Ki-67, which is a marker of how aggressively are these cancer cells growing, was downregulated by 34%. So there have been a number of studies that have shown different foods and different nutrients can change the expression of genes, and many of the genes are involved in brain tumors. Next slide. Here in slide 7, you have a brief review of some of the research so that you can see some genes involved in brain tumors, VEGF, EGFR, P53, and PDGF. We won't go into what each of these genes are. The interesting thing here is to see what kinds of foods are known to normalize the expression of these genes. Some of the foods in particular, you can see green tea, and as I'm reading these foods, you're thinking about how you'll incorporate these foods into your diet. Green teas, curries, which are a good source of curcumin, soy foods, Brazil nuts, which are the richest food source of selenium, peanuts, red grapes, which are a good source of resveratrol, raspberries, both black and red raspberries, good source of ellagic acid, onions, leeks, that whole family, garlic, shallots, chives, which are a good source of quercetin, mushrooms for their vitamin D, leafy green vegetables for their folic acid, and mint and other kitchen spices. When it comes to talking to your genes, there are really 2 ways to go about it. You want to get the phytonutrients that are in these different fruits and vegetables, but you also want to get the antioxidant effect. Next slide. Here in slide 8, you have 2 columns, column A and column B of fruits and vegetables. On the right, column B, you can see fruits and vegetables that they have a theme between them. I wonder if anyone can see what that theme is. Cauliflower, honeydew melon, iceberg lettuce, celery, cucumbers. These are your pale, light-colored fruits and vegetables. The number beside each of these vegetables represents the measured antioxidant capacity. At the Jean Meyer Nutrition Center at Tufts University, a group of researchers has spent the last decade going around different grocery food stores, taking multiple samples of each fruit and vegetable and spice and measuring the antioxidant capacity in those particular foods. The numbers that you see, like 28, 60, 105 for cucumber, celery, and cabbage respectively, are a measurement of that antioxidant capacity. On the left-hand side, you see blueberries at 3,240 ORAC, or antioxidant capacity units. Blackberries, cinnamon, pomegranate, raspberries. What you see here is an easy way to choose healthier fruits and vegetables. You're looking at the deeper, darkly colored fruits and vegetables have the most potent antioxidant capacity. I want to make a short aside here while you're looking at this slide. There's a controversy in the field about the use of antioxidant supplements during cancer treatment. We don't yet have a definitive study that would answer that question. What we need is a nice study of several hundred individuals who go through their treatment. Their antioxidant values are measured in advance, and they're given supplements, and the outcome is measured. But that study has not yet been done. So I feel that the use of antioxidant supplements is somewhat controversial during treatment. At the same time, there's no controversy about eating foods during your treatment. You certainly do need foods. And while many oncologists warn their patients not to take antioxidant supplements, vitamin E pills in this same testing, the ORAC testing, have been shown to have about 125 units. They're about as potent as a honeydew melon would be. Whereas if you're eating a diet that includes blueberries, blackberries, pomegranates, raspberries, spinach, and other healthy foods, you're going to get thousands of units of antioxidants. So eating antioxidants is a good way for you to increase gene stability, talk to the genes, and alter their expression. Next slide, slide number 9. This is the summary slide for what we now know about how to talk to your genes. So the first thing is you have to eat 8. I know our government says 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, but if you look around the world, in Canada they say 8 to 10. In France they say 10 half-cup servings of fruits and vegetables. And if you look across the vast majority of studies that have been published in this field, it really does look like 8 to 10 servings are needed to really have an influence on cancer. You want 2 to 3 of those servings as fruits and 5 or more servings as vegetables. But this eating 8 servings or more doesn't go far enough, because if you're eating all pale-colored vegetables, those light ones with the low ORAC, you're not going to get the benefit that you could get. So you want to eat across the full rainbow and choose deeply colored fruits and vegetables. The phytonutrients that talk to your genes are concentrated, different families, in different colors. So you have your carotenoids, which is a group of 600 phytonutrients in orange-yellow colored things. But you have your anthocyanins in blue and purple colored things. So you want to make sure you're eating across all the different colors of the rainbow to get the full complement of all the different phytonutrients. Next, you want to know your ORAC, your antioxidants, and you can use that slide number 8, the previous slide, to see those high antioxidant capacity fruits and vegetables like your blueberries and pomegranates. And lastly, spice it up. Kitchen spices. If you remember, cinnamon from the previous slide had 2,675 antioxidant units in a quarter teaspoon. It's also really useful in balancing your blood sugar. So this is the good way. These are some suggestions for how to talk to your genes and get the best benefit. I want to say here, too, that one thing I've been working on is a sort of secret project this year, is looking through the research and trying to plan a program where when a client comes to me, we look at their pathology report from the doctor. And if the doctor has run to look, is VEGF expressed? Is EGFR expressed? What is the MIB1? These different markers of different genes and markers of what's going on in the tumor. I've begun to print out a list of what fruits and vegetables look like they're going to be most important for talking to a person's specific tumor, and I hope to really expand that research in the coming year or two. Next slide, slide number 10. This is the second take-home tip that I want you to get, and today we're going to talk here about controlling inflammation. When we're talking about inflammation, I'm not talking about the kind of inflammation that was, you got up, the bedroom was dark, on the way to the bathroom you stubbed your toe on the foot of the bed and it got all inflamed and red. That's an acute, localized inflammation. Here I'm talking instead about a silent, hidden, low-grade, simmering or chronic inflammation that's hiding inside your body. And this has a relationship with cancer development and also with cancer survival. Next slide. You should be on slide number 11 here.
I am.
This is a study I want to show you the results of, done by Donald McMillan and colleagues. It was published back in 2001. This is a really interesting study. He took 772 people with various different types of cancer. Right at their cancer diagnosis, he measured the level of inflammation with a simple blood test called a C-reactive protein. He divided the people into 2 groups, those with a low C-reactive protein and those with a high C-reactive protein. So the people with the low inflammation, they're represented by the yellow line on this bar chart. on this graph rather, and the people with the high inflammation are represented by the purple line. And what you're looking at is the survival over about a 3-year period of these individuals diagnosed with various cancers. And you can see that when C-reactive protein or inflammation levels are low, survival is much greater across this 3-year period than when inflammation levels are high. There are now published studies in brain tumor patients showing that, one study showed that the level of inflammation, and particularly COX-2, one of the inflammatory enzymes, was the single most greatest predictive factor of long-term survival in a study of brain tumor patients. So this is a huge issue for you. But the question is, okay, so what about inflammation? What does that have to do with your diet? Well, it may surprise you to learn that inflammatory chemicals come from what you're eating, and you can greatly influence your inflammation by what you choose to eat. Next slide, we'll look at that. Slide number 12. In your body, inflammatory chemicals are derived from substrates that are fats. So fats are the precursors for inflammatory compounds. Fats are also the precursors for anti-inflammatory compounds. There are basically 3 families of fats, and they're given the name Omega-3, those are your anti-inflammatory fats. Omega-6, those are your pro-inflammatory fats. Not on this chart, there's Omega-9s, and only olive oil really fits in that family. It's considered neutral. Your Omega-6 fats become chemicals that promote inflammation. These compounds have been shown to foster tumor growth and progression, to promote the angiogenesis process, that's that development of new blood vessels that nourishes a tumor's growth. And these inflammatory compounds also suppress your immune function. These omega-6s are found in commercially raised meat, poultry, dairy, egg yolks. This is probably one reason why many nutritional practitioners suggest choosing a vegetarian diet, which could be helpful, but I don't think it's essential. You also find omega-6s, the inflammatory fats, in nuts, seeds, vegetable oils like corn oil and Wesson oil and safflower, sunflower, soybean oil. So you want to limit these omega-6s because if they're overly abundant in your diet, and for most Americans we're eating anywhere from 10 to 20, and some people are getting 30 or 40 times more of these inflammatory fats than they are of the anti-inflammatory fats. Your anti-inflammatory fats are the omega-3 fatty acids. These are the fats that you find in cold water fish, like salmon. And when you choose salmon, you want wild and not farmed, because farmed has omega-6s, not omega-3s. So salmon, sardines, cod, mackerel, herring, all the cold water fish. You also find omega-3s in flaxseed, in hemp seed oil, which isn't widely available in the U.S., but some health food stores do have it. And here's the kicker. It's in grass-fed meats, poultry, dairy, and eggs. What does this mean? It means that if you take a cow and you put it on a feedlot, and instead of letting it eat its native diet, which is grass, you feed it corn, then the meat and the milk and the dairy of that particular cow is going to be real high in omega-6s. In fact, it will have no omega-3s. But if you take that same cow and you feed it grass throughout its life, then you're not going to find an abundance of omega-6s. Instead, you're going to find these real good anti-inflammatory compounds that are the omega-3s. And you'll find them in about the same ratio that you find in fish. So if you can find organic grass-fed meat and poultry, and organic grass-fed dairy, and eggs that are high omega-3, these will be anti-inflammatory foods for you. For healthcare professionals who are in the audience, I have a lovely review article that's in the medical journal, Integrative Cancer Therapies, that flushes this out and looks at the particular pathways in great detail. You can download the full text of that journal article from my website. And it's a nice way to get that anti-inflammatory effect without the risks or side effects associated with Celebrex or with Vioxx. Next slide, slide 13. So what do you want to do with your diet to control inflammation? First, you want a mostly plant-based diet. You're going to limit your animal foods, and particularly when those are commercially raised animal foods that you know are high in omega-6s. This lets you decrease your total intake of omega-6s, which are the promoters of inflammation. At the same time, you're going to increase your intake of omega-3 fats. This means cold water fish several times a week, flax seeds, and when you choose meat, poultry, or dairy products, you're going to get the organic grass-fed. Now, where are you going to find these? You see the picture of a book here called Pasture Perfect. Jo Robinson is a writer, a journalist, and she put together a nice book and has a website that links you to the sources of organic grass-fed products. You can go to this www.eatwild.com. I was there this morning. There are 6 farms listed in New Jersey: Neptune Farms, Cherry Grove, Greener Pastures, Seabreeze Organic, Simply Grazing, and White Clover Sheep Farms that offer a variety of free range, which means they're out eating the pasture instead of being fed corn. And these will be very good sources of omega-3s. If your local store isn't carrying a source of one of these, take the contact information for the local farm into them and ask them to carry these products. You can also buy directly from the farm, and that'll save. It'll be less expensive to do it that way. You are aiming for a ratio of 1-to-1 omega-6s and omega-3s, maybe up to 3-to-1. You can get a little bit more 6s, but if you're getting 10 or 20 times more omega-6s than 3s, you're going to have a lot more inflammation that you're fighting. The more you can lower your inflammation, the easier it will be to come off Decadron when it's time to be off that medicine, and the more likely it'll be that you can stay off Decadron over the course of your treatment. It's also important, at this last little point, it says regulate your blood sugar levels. If you're eating a lot of sweets or refined carbohydrates, you increase your insulin, and insulin is a huge promoter of inflammation. Next slide. Here on slide 14, I want to flesh out what happens specifically to the omega-6s that creates the inflammation. There are 2 inflammatory compounds, COX-2 and LOX5, that take those omega-6s and turn them into the specific inflammatory compounds. That here you see that in the yellow box, the omega-6s with the 2 yellow arrows. It's really important to have a visual here because in the field right now, there's such a focus on COX-2 and COX-2 inhibitors. So you can imagine if you're using Celebrex or if you're blocking the COX-2 pathway to inflammation, what do you think happens? Those omega-6s just shunt down to the LOX pathway to promote inflammation through that secondary pathway. So if you're really going to lower your inflammation, you need to be blocking both the COX-2 pathway and the LOX5 pathway. This means that if you're taking a drug that blocks the COX-2, it's really important for you to find a way to block that LOX pathway. Of note, it is LOX that is most involved in the invasion of brain tumor cells into the adjacent healthy brain tissue, whereas COX-2 is more involved with angiogenesis and with the individual cell cycle of the cancer cells. So to get a 1-2 puncher, you want to block both of those. There are several nutritional and botanical ways to do that as well. You have in the white box on the left COX-2 inhibitors, your fish oil, and that would also be true of omega-3 oils that you would find in grass-fed meat, dairy, and poultry. Bromelain, an herb found in pineapple. Curcumin, which you get in curries. Quercetin, which you find in green apples, onions, leeks, garlic. Ginger. Resveratrol, which you find in red grapes and peanuts. Also vitamins A and E are COX-2 inhibitors. The LOX inhibitors, you have that fish oil, the omega-3 oils again. Boswellia, which has several lovely human studies in brain tumor patients. Dr. Beckers and Winking in Germany have used Boswellia as a replacement for Decadron. They took brain tumor patients with GBM tumors who had recurrence, brought them into the hospital, took an MRI, showed the level of edema and inflammation. Instead of giving these patients Decadron, they gave them high doses of the herb Boswellia, about 1,800 milligrams per day for 7 days. And then they repeated the MRI and showed that the Boswellia was just about as effective as Decadron in reducing the inflammation and edema around the tumor. So this is a really good LOX inhibitor. Curcumin is also a LOX inhibitor in resveratrol. If you are going to use these herbs and you are taking prescription medicines or you are in treatment, it behooves you to find a very knowledgeable practitioner to make sure you don't run into drug-nutrient interactions. Some of these herbs inhibit an enzyme in the liver, in the intestines, called 3A4 that many chemotherapy drugs and many experimental drugs also use. So if you're taking Iressa or Gleevec or Tarceva or certain anti-seizure drugs, things like quercetin or resveratrol or curcumin may be contraindicated. And when I work in my practice, I don't like to shoot in the dark. I don't like to say, oh, well, here's some bromelain official, boswellia, pat you on the head, see you later, good luck. I want to know that if you're trying to lower your level of inflammation, that is actually happening. So I like to use that test, the C-reactive protein. This is a simple and inexpensive blood test. Since the majority of the published studies show a survival advantage for patients who keep that number at 1 or 0, that's the target range. So if you take your first C-reactive protein and it's 3 or 8 or 80, then you keep changing your diet and under supervision of your doctor and a healthcare practitioner, use the supplements that we know are not contraindicated until you pull that C-reactive protein down under 1. Okay, next slide. Slide number 15, this last area and last little take-home that we'll talk about today is what you can do with your diet and nutrition to suppress the process of angiogenesis. Next slide. So what is angiogenesis? We mentioned it briefly earlier, and here you have the pictorial that shows you. You have a small, localized tumor. But as the tumor begins to grow, the number of cells exceeds what can be nourished by the existing blood supply. So the tumor spits out little compounds, such as the VEGF, PDGF, these various different compounds we've mentioned briefly, and that sort of tricks the body into growing dozens and even hundreds of new blood vessels that allows the tumor to get larger and eventually to invade. If you don't have this process of angiogenesis, a tumor will sit dormant and remain small. Next slide, slide 17. The various enzymes that drive the angiogenesis process, that vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF, and epidermal growth factor, EGFR. To date, there have been about 16 of these different angiogenesis-promoting enzymes that have been discovered. Sort of in the back of your mind, you're thinking again, gosh, if there are 16 of these and we just knock out one with a drug, angiogenesis will probably still find a way to happen with the remaining 15 enzymes. One thing that's been discovered is that the majority of these angiogenesis-promoting enzymes require copper in order to be activated. This means, and it's been shown in some studies, that lowering the level of copper can slow the process of angiogenesis. So the first thing you want to do is avoid foods that are very high in copper. Now I want to make a specific point here that copper is abundant in the diet. It's in most nuts, seeds, whole grains, mushrooms. If you took the approach of trying to have a no copper diet, there would be probably only Twinkies and donuts left to eat in the world. It wouldn't be a healthy diet. So I suggest instead is that you focus on the foods that are real high, more than 1 milligram per serving. Those foods would be organ meats, liver, and kidney. Yes, you have permission to leave the conference today and say, my nutritionist told me not to eat liver and kidney. Most of my clients enjoy that they don't have to eat those foods. Shellfish are also very high. These foods can range from 9 milligrams per serving of copper all the way up to 30 milligrams. So limit these foods or avoid them. Chocolate itself doesn't have copper, but prepared chocolates that are cooked in copper kettles do have quite a bit of copper. If you're taking any dietary supplements, you may want to read the label to make sure that they don't include copper. This would particularly be true of a multiple vitamin. You want to choose one that does not have copper in it. And African tea, also called rooibos tea, gets that beautiful red color from copper, so I would choose green tea instead. It may be worthwhile to look at your blood level of copper and a copper-carrying protein called ceruloplasmin. When I work with a client, I try to get the copper to the bottom of normal so that there's not an excessive amount of copper available to promote angiogenesis. If the copper is mid-normal, high normal, or elevated, we may use supplements of molybdenum, zinc, sulfur, or chlorella to lower that copper. I also want to make a note here that copper reduction alone isn't going to work. This is, again, that whole idea of the symphony. If you take, as let's see, Stephen Brehm has a study right now that's published the results of their phase 2 trial where they used a drug to lower copper alone as the only additive treatment, and it just wasn't very effective. Although George Brewer at University of Michigan has now 2 or 3 published studies in many types of cancer showing that they were effective at controlling cancer by lowering copper. I don't advise doing copper reduction alone. I think you want to, what's the word I want? You want to focus on that whole angiogenesis cascade, and the way to do that is with foods. So next slide. What we have here is the foods that are being shown in preliminary studies to have direct anti-angiogenesis effect. So I would try to incorporate these foods in the diet as much as possible. When they studied different herbs for anti-angiogenesis effect, the top of the list was common table mint, peppermint. This is rich in something called apigenin that's very highly anti-angiogenesis. Berries, particularly blueberries, but also black raspberries and red raspberries, again, very strongly anti-angiogenesis. Soy, its constituent genistein, so foods like soy milk, tempeh, tofu, miso will have some anti-angiogenesis benefit. Garlic, green tea, the anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats that we spoke of earlier, and selenium. So I always laugh, but our scientific model is set up to look at the impact or the effect of one agent. So you'll have this, lovely study where the scientist divides the animals up into groups, and group 1 gets placebo and group 2 gets garlic alone. In your diet, you can sit down to a lovely curried meal that has some garlic and curcumin, and maybe it's lots of vegetables, and you're also putting Brazil nuts sprinkled on the top, and you've made omega-3 fats in the fish, and for dessert you have blueberries and you chop a little mint on them. You could get all these constituents in your diet throughout the week and really make an impact. Next slide. Let's put this all together. What this diet looks like that we've talked about today with your 3 strategies: more fruits and vegetables so you can talk to your genes, fewer inflammatory fats, point 2, and more anti-inflammatory fats, and 3, avoiding copper and eating the foods that are highly anti-angiogenesis. This looks like a diet that is bottom of the pyramid, mostly vegetables, followed by fruits and whole grains on the next level. When I say whole grains, I mean you can see the actual grain. If you're choosing a product like a bread and you can't see the actual grain, make sure you choose one that says whole grain is the first ingredient on the label and that the fiber is real high. Above that, you have your protein sources. Above that, you have some healthy oils like olive oil and your nuts and seeds. And then the top little area of the pyramid is your herbs and spices for their really good effect at talking to the genes and antioxidant effect. Next slide. Slide number 20. This is how to put it all together. And in my mind, when I'm working with a client and advising them and teaching them, what I think of is I'm trying to get a big synergistic effect. I want the different foods and nutrients in the diet that modulate the gene expression, are anti-inflammatory, are anti-angiogenesis, and I have 2 or 3 other things I'm trying to accomplish that we didn't have time to talk about today. You can see the different foods and nutrients we talked about. Many of them have several effects. Some things like the omega-3 fats not only can modulate the expression of the genes, but are also anti-inflammatory and anti-angiogenesis. So across the whole diet, you're getting a big synergistic effect that's really been shown in my clients to make a difference in terms of their quality of life and as well as their long-term survival. Last slide. Well, blessings to each of you in your healing journey. I hope that you choose to nourish your health with wholesome foods. I'm sorry to hear about all the rain that you're having. I thought I would give you a couple of photos there just from my backyard. These are all taken within about 15 or 20 minutes of my home here, my office here. And I hope you can also incorporate the healing power of nature. I'd be happy to take questions. We have, maybe 10 minutes left.